Okay, welcome, beautiful people. We are live with Demelza Hays. Demelza, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me on today, Lee.
Yes, pleasure. You're in Liechtenstein right now, right?
I'm in Liechtenstein right now. Happy to
And
be
you're
back.
and you're from the US and you moved to Liechtenstein. What brings you to Liechtenstein?
Well, I was living in France. Yeah, I'm originally from the US, but for 7 years I've been living outside of the US. And for the first 2 years I was in India, and then I moved to France. And when I was in France, I attended a conference on Austrian economics that is hosted by the princely family of Liechtenstein. And after I went to the event, I just decided this was the right place for me to live.
Okay, what's special about Liechtenstein and what was this talk about?
Well, the conference occurs every year. It's called the Gottfried von Habler Conference, and I went to one in 2014, and I've gone to every single one since then. And it's a really nice event that's hosted by the princely family and the Austrian European Center for Austrian Economics Foundation. And basically, the meeting just discusses different topics related to economics and maybe global politics and philosophy. And the prince himself actually wrote a book called The State in the Third Millennium, which basically discusses how the state will interact with the citizens in the third millennium. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. So basically, let's see, Liechtenstein for me is kind of a combination of mannered people and good economic policies. So it's a great combination of two things that are important to me. And here the taxes are low. It's relatively easy to open up a business. I mean, it's kind of like Malta, I think, right? But instead of people speaking Maltese, they speak German.
Mhm. I I I wouldn't. I probably would say it's not like Malta. I think Malta is a little bit different. You mentioned the economic side of things and the good manners, so good culture. I heard it's actually they're very happy and they don't want to change things. And in fact, there's not much also changing, and it's also due to the small size, right? It's really direct democracy basically. But you may could have the impression that it's a bit boring. It sounds like it's a bit too conservative. Maybe is it boring, or is this actually really the value that most people would look for? Whereas in the big countries that they live in, the big nations that they live in, it's just total madness in some ways.
Well, I think there's enough non-conservative places in the world that a few conservative places remaining probably won't do too much harm, and then the weird conservative people can hide in these places. But definitely it is conservative. There's not a lot of, you know, um,
Is there a club? That would be a question, for example.
no, there's no club here. There's no dance club in the whole country. Um, but in general, if you like ideas and if you like to reflect and sit in an armchair and drink a coffee and think about philosophy, it's a great place to do that. It's definitely maybe boring for most people, and a lot of young people do leave. And I think as far as the locals go, some of them are really against the princely family because they think it's backwards to have a monarchy, and they think it's backwards to live in a country where abortions are illegal and where gay rights are limited and everything like that. But then there's a large portion of the society that appreciates the princely family and what the princely family has done for this place, because this place used to be really poor. It was so poor that Hitler thought it wasn't worth his time to invade. And now it's so wealthy. It's the wealthiest country per capita in Europe. So this is because of good economic policies that the princely family pursued.
Yeah, that's probably a good topic to touch this now. So you are also a fellow of the Mises Institute, and tell us your way into Austrian economics.
Sure, great. Well, so my uncle Larry Seacrest, he wrote a book called Free Banking that attacked Huerta de Soto's book, Money, Banking Cycles, and Bank. What is it called? He has a Huerta de Soto, the really thick book that he wrote. It's like economic money and bank cycles or something like that. And my uncle didn't really agree with that book because basically, you know, there's this whole debate between fractional reserves and then um, fully backed reserves, fully backed money. And of course, the Mises Institute and Rothbard and Walter Block and Huerta de Soto and Guido Hulsmann, they all kind of are in the fully backed reserves team. And then there's like Selgin and White at Cato, and then Larry Seacrest, my uncle, that are more of the fractional reserves team. And anyways, when I was young, I just was exposed to these ideas. And my Aunt Molly was a good friend of Ayn Rand's, and then she ended up marrying Larry Seacrest. And then so they kind of had this Austrian economics libertarian love story. And then basically, yeah, I just got exposed to it at a young age. I mean, my aunt wanted me to, I mean, my aunt was kind of so direct with the libertarianism that I actually started out as a communist because I wanted to revolt against the influence of my elders, you know, like everyone does. But then the arguments were just the communism arguments just I couldn't relate to, so I moved on from there.
Very interesting. It's a very interesting background. Maybe for the people who are not so familiar, could you give a quick summary of what Austrian economics actually is?
Oh, sure. Okay. So I didn't know what kind of hangout, live, what kind of blog this is, but I can go ahead and try to give a brief interview. So the first thing with Austrian economics is the Austrian theory of the business cycle. So this is, I think, the major contribution for our modern economy. And basically, that theory explains that our whole boom bust cycle is based on the central bank interest rate policy. So when the central bank lowers the interest rate, they have to basically open up a faucet of newly printed money. And that newly printed money gets pumped into the economy. And the financial markets, like the stock market and the bond market, and businesses become dependent on that artificial money because they basically can get loans at a cheaper rate. But when the Federal Reserve closes the faucet and actually raises interest rates, basically the entire economy collapses because it was completely dependent on that cheap money. And so this perpetuates the boom bust cycle. And you can see that before the Federal Reserve existed in 1913, we did have boom busts in America, but they were not as exacerbated as they are now. They weren't as long, they weren't as steep. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is more historical in nature, which goes back to a debate between Leon Walras and Karl Menger. And this was basically around the subjective theory of value. So prior to Karl Menger, he wrote the book, The Principles of Economics in 1871. Prior to that, there was Karl Marx's theory of value, which was the cost theory of value, which is that however much cost goes into producing the product, that's basically where the price of the product arrives, you know, is derived from.
Can you give an example for that? Because that's very funny.
Yeah, well, so for example, you know, he would make the argument that, you know, a, a good, you know, like a buggy for a horse would cost $100 because it cost $100 worth of labor to create that buggy. And so basically, he thought that the price of the product was basically dependent on how much it cost to produce it.
Yeah, but it's clear to see that you can't make this argument because like you cannot sell something for, or, you know, in the other case would be you sell something that is actually not worth $100. So you say, but I put 100 hours of work in that buggy plus resources, but maybe you just wasted it. Maybe nobody wants to buy it. Then it's not worth the price that you ask for. It doesn't add up.
Definitely. I mean, if I went and made a finger painting and the finger painting took me like 8 hours or something, and I wanted to charge someone $1,000 for it.
I would pay for it if it's nice.
Probably so would my grandmother, right? But like most
Yeah.
people wouldn't want to pay $1,000 for my finger painting, even though I put a lot of time and effort into it. So Karl Menger kind of, you know, he kind of brought up some of these points.
So Karl Menger was one of the very founder fathers, basically, of the thought of the Austrian School of Economics.
In general, that's what the Mises Institute kind of keeps as a narrative. But of course, he was walking on the shoulders of giants, right? So, the school of Salamanca was in Spain, hundreds of years prior with Thomas Aquinas, and then there was Frederick Bastiat in France, in the Basque country, and then there was several scholars in Germany that Karl Menger cited in his work. So, Karl Menger kind of put it all into one clearly written document, but he was definitely pulling from many sources over the hundreds of years and prior to him.
Okay, so yeah, the two things you mentioned were the difference in the economic cycle. So the current system is this boom and bust, enhanced by central banking, whereas the Austrians say no, it doesn't have to happen. And the second is a subjective value theory. It's also based on a philosophy or like a moral thing, right?
Well, that's kind of where Austrian economics is supposed to separate from libertarianism. So, Austrian economics, if it's really a science, then it should be value free. So, all it should be doing is using deductive logic to create theories and to, basically understand the world we live in.
Mhm.
Whereas in contrast, libertarianism is more of like a political philosophy, and that has more moral judgments in it. So, but most of the time in these communities, they get intertwined, and then the Austrian economists try to argue for certain, certain points that are more than just based on science. They're more of like a moral position.
Currently, the mainstream economics says it's all right. It's very important that you have central authority and regulatory bodies and all these mechanisms to basically prevent or lower the risks of the otherwise chaotic market, and the monetary management is very, very important to stabilize the economy and to support the economy. And that's basically science because it's taught in universities. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in mainstream economics, I mean, I'm doing my PhD in economics now, and I think in mainstream economics, they do kind of say, well, Austrian economics isn't really science because it's so ridden with values, but so is mainstream economics. They just don't really admit to the values that they're perpetuating. So both are not value free in a way. But yeah, in general, I mean, it's kind of up to whatever your preference is. But I think that if you go back and you look at Hayek's work on the use of knowledge in society, so Hayek won the Nobel Prize in economics, and he had a lot of really good papers on this topic. And one paper he wrote about is kind of how knowledge is used in society. So basically, knowledge is contained in the individual, and when a government body tries to make decisions for a large group of individuals, they can't possibly possess all of the knowledge that those individuals possess. It's just not possible because the government body doesn't actually know the preferences of the individuals. And so I think that if you want to have the best use, the most efficient use of knowledge in society, you need to allow individuals to make the highest amount of decisions possible for themselves.
Mhm.
And that's going to be the best outcome. But I think that's, a lot of people would say, well, there's an elite group of people that know more and know better than the mass. And I think that could be argued as well in certain cases. And then in that sense, they need to live in a society that fits their preference. But I prefer, one where individual has more autonomy.
Mhm. So if you give an example, maybe again, at the moment we believe the planning authority of what kind of money we're supposed to use and what works knows right. But then on the other hand, we had these crises in 2008 and 2010. Did you do research on that? Can you describe what happened from an Austrian perspective?
Sure. I mean, from an Austrian perspective, I mean, I'm not an expert on the 2008 crisis, but definitely they would argue from an Austrian economics perspective, they would argue that it began when Alan Greenspan lowered interest rates after 9/11. So Alan Greenspan lowered interest rates. He made the argument that they needed to lower interest rates in order to help out the failing airlines in the United States. However, what happened was a lot of money was printed, and that money basically went into the real estate market. And then basically when the Fed started to when Bernanke raised interest rates, this faucet of newly printed money was basically closed off, and then one by one, these people that had taken out mortgages could no longer refinance their mortgages because the faucet of cheap money was closing, and then basically these people started defaulting. Another argument that exists is that it wasn't really our normal banking system that collapsed in 2008. It was what's called the shadow banking system, and basically this is a whole group of financial intermediaries that exist in the United States that aren't exactly covered by the federal deposit insurance. However, they are covered implicitly by the government. And so these organizations, like for example, the investment banks like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, they know that they're too large to fail and that the government will bail them out regardless of how much risk they take on. So, there's this saying that we have in the community, which is privatize your gains and socialize your losses. So if these banks can make a bet where the bet has a high return that they get to keep, and it's very risky, and the chance that they lose is high, but if they lose, they don't have to pay the bill, the taxpayers have to pay the bill, then it's a good business to be in, right? So basically the Austrian economist would say there was a bit of moral hazard here. These banks knew that they would be bailed out, so they acted in certain ways that allowed them to take on more risk. Mixing that with low interest rates that are artificially decided on by the central bank, people in the Austrian economics community were predicting this crash for 3 or 4 years prior to it occurring. So everybody saw the writing on the walls.
Do the Austrian people also predict another crash ahead?
They definitely do, because all financial markets are at their all-time highs right now. So this is definitely suspicious because why should they be at their all-time highs? Our economy is not twice as good as it was in 2008. So how can they be worth twice as much as they were in 2008? This is definitely the cause of the unconventional monetary policies that central banks around the world have been pursuing since 2008. So basically in 2008, what happened is we had this immense deflationary pressure on the money supply, and central banks around the world responded by creating money in amounts that we've never seen before. I mean, in our recent history. So basically what happened is, the money supply increased by hundreds of percents in every country. In Switzerland, for example, the SNB printed more money than any other central bank. They printed 66-fold increase in their monetary base. And basically all of that money just went right into the stock exchange in Switzerland, the real estate market in Switzerland, negative yielding bonds. And basically once these central banks begin to back out of this artificial interest rate monetary policy, then these financial markets are not going to have any money available for further investment, and then they're going to stagnate, and in a worse scenario, they're going to decline.
Yeah, we probably, it's the thing is also I find it so interesting to talk about it. I think though it's probably endless because you can dive in for a whole academic career as you decided probably. Maybe to finish the assessment, would you attest that there is you said peak numbers on the stock exchanges and the markets. Compared to the past decades, is there anything else where you see there is a very big side effect or negative side effect of how we run the system? Also, I mean, I know some of Jörg Hülsmann's work where he talks about the cultural effects of inflation, and also you met with Safieddine Ammous, who's also quite into that, to analyze, what are the effects. They're very difficult to analyze, but there might be some things that you know.
Oh, let's see. Definitely. Well,
I mean, besides consumer prices going higher and like rent prices going higher, and like I think there is probably a global real estate bubble in some way. Here in Malta, it's also. I mean, in Malta, you might argue, okay, it makes sense. There's very attractive regulation now, and like it's a small island, but still, it's ridiculous that people, they're just they don't get it. It's completely out of space.
yeah, I think in general the main problem for me is that we don't have enough competition. So I would just like to see more competition in all areas. So, for example, financial policy, I think, right now we have countries that are deciding financial markets for millions of people in each country. And I think that what we need to do is we need to allow more competition to allow for better monetary policies to rise up and for consumers to choose which monetary policies they prefer. Because in general right now, if you leave the dollar and you go into another fiat currency, you're basically getting the same product. I mean, fiat currencies around the world are all offering similar monetary policies. And if you try to change your monetary policy as a sovereign state, I mean, you risk really huge threats from the cartel of fiat currencies. So I think in general, a lot of countries are scared to offer a gold backed fiat currency or a petrol backed fiat currency. And I think that what we need to see is more competition in this market, and that's another reason I'm interested in cryptocurrencies, because I think they offer kind of an exit for people that are a little bit, a little bit.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I totally agree. Of course, it's so boring to have only one product. It would be like, you go, I don't know, shopping a car, and there would be only one sort of car, like only, let's say, um, like cars like a Golf or something, right? Or like in the supermarket in the drink section, there's like only one type of Coke or something. It's not meant the way the world, and like how can we be so sure that that is really the only way? Like, of course, we so far we have been good, we created wealth and the economy went, but maybe there are much better ways to do it. You mentioned the Hayek's book, Denationalization of Money. Is in your eyes Bitcoin the trigger and the honey badger that will ultimately make this happen, make this a reality?
Ooh, specifically Bitcoin, that's hard to say. I
I
definitely
mean, Bitcoin, it could do, maybe I rephrase and say Bitcoin opened up this competition because it's open source, people could copy it, and through the decentralization that worked for the first time, it was actually possible to launch currencies without the government shutting them down.
definitely. I do think that this is going to be a blossoming of creativity and monetary policy, and I think that as we go forward, we're going to see consumers choosing which monetary policies they like the most, because each cryptocurrency is an experiment in a monetary policy. And I think that basically over time, the regulators that exist now, the central banks that exist now, are going to have to adapt to cryptocurrencies, because they're going to see that people actually prefer certain policies over the ones that currently exist. And I think, for example, like I was at the Lindau Nobel Laureate meeting last year, and I presented on the topic of cryptocurrencies, and they said, oh, your work is basically these Nobel laureates, a few of them, they basically said your work is useless because cryptocurrencies don't have you can't inflate them, right? And I said, okay, that's true. According to your monetary policy, you need to be able to inflate the money supply because you need to jumpstart the economy because you're a Keynesian. But I think there's people in the economy, especially elderly people and people that don't have access to newly printed money, like low income people, that would actually prefer not to have money that loses its value every year, right? So I think that in general, we're going to see certain people switching into cryptocurrencies because they're just harder money. They're harder money than the money they have now. I mean, it used to be the case that the money was so stable in America that a plumber could just focus on being a plumber and a dentist could just focus on being a dentist. But now, because of how quickly our money is debased, a plumber and a dentist also have to focus on finance, and they have to figure out how to invest their money in a way so that they don't lose the value of their labor to inflation. And so I think that going forward, I think people are going to demand a harder currency for sure.
You mentioned that meeting with the, I don't know, I remember, but you also, I saw you were invited at the event from the Federal Reserve of the US, the Fed. It was very interesting how you phrased it, that you said, yeah, well, you're a Keynesian, of course you want to inflate the money, but you kept a very polite way of answering, saying, well, maybe people don't like this product, right? So is this something where you see people are waking up, or like, from their original conditioned mindset, they kind of understand now, okay, actually what we do, it's nothing else than a service which underlies these market powers. And if there is a system like Bitcoin that we cannot shut down, then we have to maybe improve our product. And maybe what people really want, the core functionality of Bitcoin, of a money, is the store of value. And when we inflate our money all the time, this is not well done, basically, and people then seek alternatives. And I agree also with what you mentioned, that the people who are in a pension or something, they have problems, because like after a couple of months, they feel like the 10 cents each product gets a little bit higher in price in the supermarket. After some period, it actually really is money that they lose, and they have no way to get it back, basically. Do you think this market power is right of like really being active, so that it's at the moment it still works, everybody uses Bitcoin because they haven't seen the good alternatives that exist now? And do you think this will switch in, let's say, short period, or like a couple of years?
Okay, so just to confirm your question, you're saying Bitcoin has market power now, but do you think that other technologies will take away from Bitcoin's market?
No, I mean, again, I think it's all about there's a market now. There was no market before. There was simply no market before. Now there is a market. Whatever, I don't mind what it is. At the moment, it looks like Bitcoin is still, the number one. It works. It does the job. It's technically sound. It has reputation. So money needs trust first and foremost of the people. But more about, okay, people have never been able to think about what kind of money they want, because it was all done for them. And also nobody understands it. Not a single person understands what money is. Especially even people in Bitcoin, they think about the decentralization, they think about the technology, they think about blockchain a lot, but they miss out on what it actually is. What is actually, the money that Bitcoin tries to represent.
Definitely. Well, yeah, even economists don't agree on what money is. So there's different camps within mainstream economics of what money is, and then there's camps of the Austrian economists, and then there's the Marxists that have their definition. I mean, there's just a wide variety of definitions of money. But in general, when I was at the Federal Reserve meeting, I mean, it was a little bit intimidating, a little bit scary, because they're they were discussing different models of releasing a central bank cryptocurrency called the Fed coin. And basically what this Fed coin would be is it would be directly issued to the citizens of the United States. So each citizen would have an account with the Fed, instead of the way we currently do it, which is each citizen has a variety of banks to choose from. We open up a bank account at Wells Fargo or Bank of America, and then the Federal Reserve uses different instruments like interest rate policy or the overnight lending rate, or the reserve ratio, to impact the monetary supply in the economy. However, in the future, if they do adopt a Fed coin, it would be where the central bank can directly increase or decrease the amount of money I have in my bank account. And I think that's really something to be concerned about if they have a monopoly on cryptocurrencies. So if they don't allow competition with Bitcoin, then this is a really easy way for the central bank to get rid of America's debt, because all they have to do is just, we all go to sleep and we wake up in the morning and the Gabriel Angel has done some helicopter money on our cryptocurrency accounts, and now all of us have 10 times as many Fed coins as we did the night before. And what that's going to allow the central bank to do is basically inflate the currency so much that their own debt, the government debt, will be basically um, removed. You know, it'll be so easy for them to pay off their debt when they debase the currency. So I think as long as they allow Bitcoin to exist and they allow other cryptocurrencies to exist, then people can basically say, okay, I see that my FedCoin account is increasing steeply. I see that the price of milk is going up, etc. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to store my money in Fed coins. I'm going to store my money in Bitcoin or in whatever, other cryptocurrency people prefer. So I think as long as there's competition, we can make our governors behave. But if we don't have competition, then our governors can get away with anything. You know, they can get away with robbing the purchasing power of our
Mm.
savings. And they have done that in the past, right? So Reinhardt and Rogoff did 800 years of data analysis and found that every government has either debased or defaulted on their debt. So basically, this is the way governments get out of debt, and who takes the bill is the poor people in society.
Mhm. What is the motivation maybe behind using such a inflationary system? Because I mean, maybe it's just human nature that it's very easy. It's a very good business model. I also read a story about yeah, I think it's many times in history, right? Even in literature, you find examples where they speak about how the king inflated the money or debased it. In China, the Khan also under actually death penalty forced merchants to give the gold to the king and in return get a paper receipt. What is the motivation? Do you know anything?
Well, I can say that that's another thing that makes the current mainstream economics theory a little bit strange because this has been going on for 800 years, and now economists are creating these theories that basically justify what's been going on for 800 years, and that's a little bit suspicious as well. Why didn't the theory come before the action, so but in general, what mainstream economists say is, because most central banks target inflation rates. So they'll target like 2% inflation per year. And they basically make the argument that if you don't inflate the currency, then people will know that next year the price of goods and services will be lower because it's a natural tendency for deflation in the economy because the population is increasing and therefore the demand for money is increasing. So if you have a constant supply and an increasing demand, then the purchasing power will increase of the money. And so what the economists argue and the central banks argue is that we must inflate the money supply a little bit per year. Otherwise, people will literally stop buying everything. They won't buy a car this year because they know next year it will be 2% cheaper. They won't buy food this year because next year it will be 2% cheaper, et cetera, whatever. But the truth is that, of course, people have to consume and in order to survive. So there's no way that we can indefinitely postpone all of our consumption into the future because we must eventually have a laptop. We must eventually have a phone and a roof over our heads and food and everything. But in general, that's why they argue we must inflate. But I think what really is the case is that we have the tendency to go into debt and then we don't want to actually suffer the consequences of paying off that debt. It's just like any individual who goes into debt and then wants to go bankrupt instead of figuring out how to pay it off. So the governments have figured out that it's not politically palatable to get rid of the debt by default. Because if they just tell all of their debtors, oh, hey, by the way, we can't pay you back, this is a big problem politically because their debtors can come after them. For example, if their debtor is another sovereign country, then their debtor can come after them with the threat of force.
Mm.
If their debtor is their people, then their people will not lend to them again in the future. So basically, what they've shown is that if you default, if you just come up and you just say, "Look, I can't pay you back," they've shown that what this does is the next time the government goes onto the market to borrow money, their interest rates are so much higher, right? Their interest rates increase so much because everybody knows that they just defaulted on their debtors. However, what they also found out empirically is that if you don't default, if you don't get rid of your debt by default, but instead if you get rid of your debt by inflation, people don't understand inflation. So there aren't many political consequences of it. So actually they can completely get rid of their debt without having, the polls on their political favorability decrease. Like these politicians can get rid of their debt and still people in the economy like them because they don't understand what inflation is. So I think the whole goal is to get rid of the debt, but without making people mad.
Okay, interesting point. I mean, it's crazy to talk about the thing because you just, I don't know, realize that it's ridiculous, basically. Like what we do, who did come up with this crazy system, basically. Also, would you say it's very connected because you're saying like debitors are different countries and like China and like the big currencies are interconnected. It's all interconnected. And also we saw it in the last crisis that when there was a crisis in the US, it's all over the place and has effects. But I wonder now they can do this they can use inflation to get rid of parts of their debt for a certain time, if they manage it well. On the other hand, it's also risky. It can easily become a hyperinflation. Do you see them? Do you have a feeling, or did you think about that? Like, where will this go? Where will this? I mean, my problem is only we talk a lot about the negative sides, and I also want to have some time for the positive sides. But maybe as a last, do you expect a major crisis ahead, or like just as an example in Venezuela, right? Like it's now an actual crisis there. I wonder if this can go for forever.
Well, it can go on forever, basically. I mean, so France has been pursuing these policies of convince the people to use a currency, then the government goes into debt, and then the government debases the value of the currency, and then they issue a new currency, and then they convince the people to use that currency, and then the government goes into debt, and this cycle's been going on in France for several hundred years with assignats and then several other currencies that were issued by the crown. And still France survives on today and is one of, the one of the nicer countries to go to be a tourist in and everything. So it can definitely go on forever, but I think that in America you can definitely see that the middle class is being squeezed out of existence, and this is because of bad economic policies, especially bad monetary policies that wipe out people's savings from underneath them without them understanding what's going on.
Mm.
So I think that in general, this, basically what America is doing is they have created this reserve currency because they were able to win the World War II, and they basically got everyone around the world to use their currency as the reserve. And what they've been able to do is export inflation to all of their trade partners through basically import-export currency wars, because when America prints a lot of money, they debase their currency, and then what happens is, like, for example, take for example the euro. If America prints a lot of money, then what happens is the euro appreciates relative to the dollar. But the problem there is that the European export markets are dependent on American citizens buying their products. So the euro in order to protect its currency market, it has to engage in some kind of currency war where then it has to debase its currency so that the euro then begins to decrease in value so that it's back on par with the dollar. And so we have these currency wars all around the world, and effectively what's happening is America is just shipping its newly printed money to other countries and basically um, exporting its inflation to the world. And I think that once other countries realize they can use other currencies, for example, like cryptocurrencies or central bank issued cryptocurrencies in the future, I think the dollar's power is going to be decreasing, and eventually, if the Central Bank of America does not begin to pursue harder currency, I think they're going to lose their status as the reserve currency of the world.
Mhm. So that might be also the reason why they look into the Fed coin and try maybe to prone a shift from the existing into something that is I mean, like the Fed coin that you mentioned there wasn't really doesn't seem to be a sound money, a hard currency. More of like actually even worse. Like there's no corrective anymore. There's no user control anymore. It's like everybody has a bank account on the central bank, and it's fully controlled by them. I wonder maybe to make the switch now to Bitcoin. I'm always very interested in like the personal story of someone, your first Bitcoin transaction. And maybe you then can go ahead with the back to the we discussed it already a little bit, this personal choice thing. So Saifedean Ammous in his book Bitcoin Standard argues that it's very simple to see how money works. There's hard money and easy money, and hard money usually kills the easy money. What's your point on that?
I definitely agree with Saif's arguments. He's really well versed in Austrian economics and mainstream economics, being a professor in Lebanon, and I think his book is an excellent review of all of these topics for anyone interested in cryptocurrencies. But basically, yeah, I got interested in Bitcoin in 2013. I was working for the Department of State in India, and they had given a group of researchers a task to study microfinance. And basically, there was a person who won, I think he won the Nobel Peace Prize for helping people in Bangladesh get access to small loans. And his name was Mohammed Yunus, and he was from he created a bank called the Grameen Bank. And basically, the idea is so poor people don't have enough money to save in their bank account for the bank to actually um, make enough money off of that bank account to have an incentive to offer them a bank account. So basically, when a bank offers somebody a bank account, the bank incurs costs, and they have to offset those costs by the money that the person stores in their bank. So the bank can actually use that money in order to lend that out to other people, and then the bank can basically offset the cost of offering the account. But when you're a poor person, you only save $2 per month. It's really not cost effective for the bank to offer you a bank account. And when I was working for the Department of State, we found out that some people in India were actually using like other forms of currency because they actually had no access to the traditional banking system. And that's when I basically found out about Bitcoin. And then eventually
What exact other forms? So where I think I know in some parts of Africa they have like phone credit minutes basically that they use as a store of value as a means of exchange.
Exactly, that's the same in India. So they do use the M-Pesa that's offered by Vodafone. So it's the same currency.
So essentially Vodafone is doing a better banking service than the normal banks. It's fascinating. Probably because it's unregulated, so it's more cost efficient.
Well, that's part of it too. It's more cost efficient, but also I think it's harder money than most of the money that these people have access to.
It's like the Disney dollar. The Disney dollar also outperformed the normal dollar, so they had to stop it. It was like it went through the roof because they didn't inflate the Disney dollar so much, and then they had to stop it.
Interesting. Exactly. Yeah. So if you have a harder money, I mean, that's Gresham's law, right? So definitely people are going to hoard the harder money and use the easier money as a medium of exchange. And the problem is that the people that print money want actually want the demand for their currency as a store of value to remain stable. Because the people that print the money need us to store their money. Because if we all start releasing our dollars into the economy, their ability to benefit from inflation decreases. And that's when we basically go into a hyperinflation because they keep printing all this money and nobody in the economy is demanding any of it. Right. So that's when we go into hyperinflation.
And in which year was this this analysis, and then when was your first Bitcoin transaction, basically?
That was in 2013 when I got exposed to it, and then in 2014 was when I first started doing my my first Bitcoin transactions. And basically, what I was doing was I was buying Bitcoin in America, and then I was basically using them in Europe. Yeah.
So remittance, basically.
Yeah, remittance. That's basically how it started out for me. I had
Okay.
a really hard time with the French banking system because my bank account in US would not allow me to send international wires because I had lower than a certain account balance. So I think I had like less than 10,000 in my bank account, and so I wasn't allowed to send international wires, which is totally crazy. So then what I had to do is I had to send a check. Like I had to write a handwritten check from my bank in America, and I had to deposit it into my bank in France. And that took 3 weeks to process. And it was a fee of like, I don't know, it was like €100 fee. And then I had to suffer the exchange rate, which of course they never gave me a good exchange rate because they have monopoly power. So, basically remittance between Bitcoin, it was a much better way to do it. And I used
Cool.
to do different activities and get paid in Bitcoin. Like I would write articles for liberty.me and, do random things online for people and get paid in Bitcoin and everything like that. So yeah, 2014 is when I first started really getting involved.
What is the focus of your PhD research, and then after you were fascinated by Bitcoin, like how did you move on? What kind of books did you read? Which area did you focus? I mean, Bitcoin is also it's technically so big and so complex, but also the implications. Like there's so many ways to think about it and do things with it. What did you do the last years, basically?
Well, since I got involved in 2014, basically I set myself up to lose 50% of my value,
Oh
over.
yeah, that was the peak. Yeah. But that's good because like whenever there's a peak, a lot of people get in, right? And then you separate basically. Some people are very depressed, and some maybe still look into it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was kind of a believer in the idea of more competition in money, and so I thought that this is a good idea, it has fundamental value, and I'm going to hold. But there was always that creeping thought and doubt inside of me that was like, wait, did I just invest in some kind of Ponzi scheme, or what did I do here? So that kind of motivated me to use some of my knowledge of economics and financial markets to understand cryptocurrencies. And currently, I'm doing my PhD in economics with a focus on the role of cryptocurrency in asset management. So I've been teaching a course at the University of Liechtenstein for the past 2 years on Bitcoin, and I work at a Vermögensverwaltung, like a wealth management firm, where we have a cryptocurrency fund. And basically, I spend all day just analyzing financial aspects of cryptocurrencies, either statistical analysis or fundamental analysis. And there's tons of literature and events that have helped me. I mean, a big thing that has helped me is the University of Nicosia's free online course that is with Andreas Antonopoulos. I think that's an excellent opportunity for people to get involved with this topic because it's an open forum, so you can go live with Andreas Antonopoulos, which is possibly one of the most knowledgeable people in this space, and you can ask him questions live, and he'll take your question and he'll answer it. So I think, and that's totally free consulting. So I think that's a great opportunity. I think the course for free that's on Coursera by University of Princeton on blockchain technologies. I think it's called Bitcoin and or blockchain and cryptocurrency technologies or something. That's a great course, and they have a textbook with it that explains all of the distributed computing aspects and all the computer science aspects. That's really helpful. And then there's always, like nowadays, there's blockchain summer schools. I mean, in 2 weeks from now, I'm going to go to a blockchain school offered at the Goethe University in Frankfurt. And this is going to be a 1 week long course just on peer reviewed papers done on cryptocurrencies. And this will be for doctoral students and postdoctoral students. So this is definitely, there's more and more events available where researchers are coming together and forming collaborative teams and doing analyses together.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. You mentioned, so your focus is on asset management. Now I have a question. I'm not sure if it's a valid one. But you mentioned also before that people actually like don't understand money, and a plumber, the example is like he now has to do research on how he can invest his money. Otherwise, he has no chance to cope with the downsides of the monetary policy that he will experience. But historically, I think I don't know. I read something. Back then, when there was a gold standard, people just kept their savings in gold. So saving is kind of the poor man's investment strategy if there is a good money at hand. And now also with you also mentioned that I think that everything is in assets now, and I think there's a number that in the past 2 decades or something, like 40% of American companies or even more, like they invested, instead of machinery and means of productivity and like real hard value, they invested just in numbers and financial instruments, and so it's basically a financialized economy. And now Bitcoin is eventually kind of the we talked about it a bit that it could change things quite a lot, because it offers a completely new system, and if people choose it voluntarily, then it will challenge the status quo. And now asset management, of course, every new technology, right, goes to the rich people first. Is this now maybe the starting point of adoption, that when all the investment bankers and all the wealth managers and all the people who understand value quite a lot, because they invest they're rich and they invest, if they understand sound money and Bitcoin, would that be basically the starting point of then it's just a domino effect?
Well, that's a great question, Lee. I think in general, we kind of have two different systems. We have the old traditional financial system, and then we have this new digital financial system. And I think for a couple of years, we're going to try to work with both and see how we can intertwine them. And I think, for example, with the cryptocurrency fund, I think a lot of large investors, they want to invest in Bitcoin, but they don't know how to store cryptocurrency.
Control your private key. Never leave your coins on an exchange. Never invest what you cannot afford to lose.
Exactly. But they don't, for example, maybe an investor, he might own a company. Like in Liechtenstein, we have a company called Hilti, and they make a lot of tools. And, the guy who owns Hilti, he specializes in tool making, but he doesn't really want to focus on how to store cryptocurrencies. So he could come to somebody like Incrementum, the firm I work for, and ask and give us some money and tell us, you figure out the rest, and I'll pay you a fee for figuring out the rest. And I think that we still have a need for intermediaries. I mean, for example, the cryptocurrencies that we hold are insured against employee theft and negligence. And I think that a lot of people feel more comfortable investing in this technology when it's kind of cradled within the existing financial system. And then we have Ernst & Young auditing our accounts, and then we have licenses. We have regulated licenses, so that if we do anything wrong, they can sue us in court. And what else? We just have various measures in place. For example, if one of our investors passes away, we know who his beneficiary is, so that we can pass on the cryptocurrency to the beneficiary. This is all different from normally investing in Bitcoin. When you pass away, your relatives will never know how to figure out where your private key is and gain access to it. So I think for a while, we're going to basically go through a phase of where we're trying to make both of these systems work together, because there's disadvantages and advantages of both. And I think going forward, we're just going to have a higher quality product overall because of this new competition.
Perfect. Yeah, I fully agree. I also think like let's take the best of both. Let's take the sound business, the sound, like insuring coins, making it as customer friendly, as user friendly as possible. but Bitcoin offers the proposition. It was the one that basically stroked the hole in the wall and opened up the opportunity which was never possible before. And together we if we combine it, probably there's great times ahead. Do you think in the next, what do you expect? How do you see the future? Let's say the Austrian school is successful, like you explaining it in easy words so people understand it, and then also people get attracted and appealed, and they buy Bitcoin. Do you think this could lead to a world which is much more sound, let's say? And if you would predict, we call it hyper Bitcoinization, right? Do you think there could be a transition in the next couple of decades? And how does this world? What's the main difference then, maybe in this new world?
Well, it's hard to forecast the future, as any sane person would first start off by saying. But in general, I think there's different forces at work right now. I mean, America and the regulators there. I mean, FinCEN, the Department of Justice, the SEC, the CFTC, the Fed. They don't want to let go, and I think that they're going to put up a good fight, given the fact that they're the largest organization that's ever existed in all of human history, right? So they have a lot of ammunition at their disposal, and I think they're not going to go out so easily. And if they manage to outlaw cryptocurrencies, then I think Europe won't have much of an option either. And I definitely think, it's going to be an interesting time ahead. If the central authorities have some decency left in them, I think that they're going to see the potential of this innovation and the potential for the standard of living of everyone in society, especially poor people, to increase. And I think that they could just adapt to this technology. But it's hard to say what's going to happen, if they're either going to come down on this technology very harshly, or if they're going to allow it to thrive and then they're going to compete with it. So it's hard to say, but I think in general, I have some hope for the goodness of others and the goodness of Americans. And I think that hopefully they're going to allow this to exist. And then over time, they're just going to adopt better policies themselves. So that's my hope, and I'm optimistic.
Fantastic. Well, Demelza, it was an absolute pleasure and honor to have you here on board. I hope you come to Malta at some point soon.
Sure, would love to. I also have some other people I want to visit there, and I'm working on a paper right now comparing Malta, Gibraltar, and Liechtenstein for a legal journal. So,
oh wow! When is this gonna be published?
It's gonna be published on December 7th.
Okay. Yeah. So a good opportunity would be the Malta Blockchain Summit on November 1st and 2nd.
Okay.
But probably depending how it all goes here with the regulation, next year is also going to be an amazing year.
Wonderful. Well, that's fantastic. I look forward to talking to you again and possibly coming to Malta.
Awesome. Thank you so much. To the viewers, I say thanks for watching. Buy Bitcoin, be free, no financial advice, and see you in the next video.
Okay.